Good afternoon and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Sunday the 28th of September and my name is Brian Liddy and we have on the programme this week, we're delighted to be joined by Mike Small from Bella Caledonia. Good afternoon, Mike. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm good, thanks.
Thank you for joining us. And we are also delighted to welcome the SNP President, Maureen Watt. Maureen, good afternoon. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. And I should say I'm here in my own capacity, not representing the SNP as party president.
Okay,
My
thank you for that.
comments are my own, as they say.
Okay, noted, and thank you. We're just really pleased to have you both this afternoon. Thank you. To start, we begin with the Middle East update. At least 65,926 Palestinians have been killed and 167,800 people have been wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, with a further 23 killed in airstrikes since dawn today. As the grotesque idea of appointing Tony Blair is suggested and Netanyahu attempts to justify genocide at the UN, the West Bank has been attacked by settlers while villages and cities are put under lockdown by the IDF. Maureen, I don't think you were on the programme this week. I don't think you were on the programme on the day when we covered the fact that Tony Blair was visiting Donald Trump in the Oval Office. And my question to our guest that day was, what's Tony Blair up to? And so I'm going to ask you the same again today. What is Tony Blair up to in the Middle East?
Well, I mean, Tony Blair still wants to be relevant, even although he hasn't been Prime Minister for a decade at least now, well, since I can't remember when, 2001 was it? So yeah, maybe 20 years or more. However, I mean, he does have this foundation or whatever he calls it, and still is obviously recognised as somebody that governments in the Middle East and now in the US listen to or want to hear from. What exactly he is proposing, I'm not clear. I don't know if anybody else is. But, you know, I don't care who sorts this out, as long as people in Gaza are stopped being killed and wounded. And the reception that Netanyahu got at the UN this week should tell, you know, people with any conscience something, that so many countries just walked out. But of course, Trump isn't going to listen to that because he doesn't recognise the UN as being a serious body. So my view is, you know, if somebody like Tony Blair or whoever else can contribute to stopping the war in Gaza, then I don't care. Whether he, you know, ends up as being somebody who actually goes in as kind of Governor General and sorts out Palestine, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. I suspect not. You know, it needs to be, you know, I think people from the Middle East themselves that sort it out, albeit with help on governance from outside. And yeah, that's my view. Let's see what happens.
Thank you, Maureen. Mike, do you agree with Maureen? And if, as long as it stops the deaths, it's worthwhile? Or is this going to be the UK, Westminster, repeating what it did in Palestine back in when it was created?
I don't really trust the Tony Blair Institute, which is the main think tank behind this moves. There was an interesting piece by Peter Gagan, who was the founder of the Ferret, who has launched a project called Democracy for Sale. And he had an interview this week that I would recommend with George Monbiot, where they were talking about Larry Ellison, who is the CEO of Oracle and was at one point the world's richest man, who is one of these characters who slightly flies below radar, other than Peter Thiel or Elon Musk or Zuckerberg, but he's in their sort of league, and he has been flooding money into the Tony Blair Institute. And I would be highly suspicious of Blair's involvement in the Middle East, because he contributed to, or the Tony Blair Institute contributed to, the grotesque plans for a Gaza Riviera that Trump produced a few months ago. So my instinct and my information is that this is about real estate and development and privatization of what's essentially a war zone of complete carnage. So anything other than an international aid mission to resurrect that state and help those people would be highly questionable in my view.
Thank you, Mike. Maureen, is there anything that maybe you want to add in response to Mike?
Well, obviously, I bow to Mike's superior knowledge on the ground on this, and take on board everything that he said. I mean, I do agree that Tony Blair isn't the philanthropist. He is, through his foundation, making millions and millions. So, obviously, there has to be a degree of caution. But I think that's why I said that, in my view, the main protagonists of getting peace would be people in the Middle East themselves. I think in terms of Palestinians and the Palestinian state and the two-state solution, the people who are most likely to be able to drive that forward is people in the Middle East, albeit, with international recognition. But, any dialogue from any source, even ones that can be discredited, like the Tony Blair Foundation, I think is to be welcomed and either, taken on board or discarded, as Mike's suggesting in this case.
Thank you, Maureen. Mike, my question was like, what's Tony Blair up to? But obviously Donald Trump is implicated. What do you think he might be up to?
Well, I mean, the American politics is flooded with Israeli money, with this organization, PAIC, which funds political campaigns and has subsidized Trump to the order of $200 or $300 million. So he's completely compromised, and he's wedded to Netanyahu. He's not an honest broker. I think that this is coming to a breaking point, though, both in American politics, if you can see by the election of Mamdani, the new mayor of New York, who is very much pro-Palestine solidarity, and has managed to get Jewish New York support, because that's very important to show the Jewish people's support for the end of this brutal war. So Trump is flooded with Israeli money, is completely compromised, and is increasingly isolated in his support for Netanyahu. We can see this week with the flotilla taking aid to Palestine, which is now 40 or 50 ships. And I saw that both Italy and Spain and Greece have sent naval support ships to support that peaceful flotilla. We can also see with the sports and cultural boycott that Israel is increasingly a pariah nation, and Trump will become more and more isolated as this goes on. It may reach a head when the World Cup happens next year in the Americas, including in USA, and there's talk of a mass boycott of that if Israel are allowed to take part.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be covering that if and when it happens. Thank you, Mike. So today is the 1,313th day of the war in Ukraine. And Kyiv came under heavy bombardment early today in what dependent monitors said was one of the biggest Russian attacks on the Ukrainian capital since Moscow launched its full-scale war more than 3.5 years ago. Drones flew over the city and surrounding region, and anti-aircraft fire rang out through the night. Some residents fled to metro stations deep underground for safety. Many regions across the country were under red alert. Ukraine is working on a deal to sell its drones to the US, as well as major arms purchases from Washington, Volodymyr Zelensky has said. Kyiv has prepared a list of about $90 billion worth of American weapons that it wants to buy, with Ukrainian officials set to visit the US this month or next for talks. Saturday, President Zelensky announced that Israel had supplied Ukraine with a US-made Patriot anti-missile defence system for the first time, and Poland closed the airspace near its southeastern cities of Lublin and Rzeszów, and the Polish military said it scrambled aircraft to ensure the security of its airspace after Russia launched strikes on Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has warned that any aggression against Moscow will be met with a decisive response, warning against attempts to down aircraft in Russian space. And the power cut to the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, Europe's biggest nuclear plant, has continued for a fourth day today. Ukraine said on Saturday that Ukraine accused yesterday Moscow of causing the blackout. Emergency generators are being used to power cooling and safety systems after the final power line into the plant was cut on the Russian side at 4:56 p.m. on Tuesday. Again yesterday, Russia claimed to have captured 3 villages in eastern Ukraine. Moscow has captured about 0.8% of Ukraine's total land area since the beginning of the year, according to Russia's defense ministry. Ukraine said an overnight Russian barrage killed 1 person and wounded 12 in the southeastern Kherson region and damaged railways in the neighbouring Odessa region. Russia said an oil pumping station in the Chuvashia Republic suspended operation after a Ukrainian drone strike deep behind the front line. Mike, that was a fairly lengthy Ukrainian update today. Is there anything that you'd like to highlight?
Well, I mean, I suppose we've seen at the beginning of this week, we saw Trump do a complete U-turn after failed talks by him, saying he was very disappointed in Vladimir Putin and that he thought that Ukraine could win the war militarily and win back all of the regions that they had taken from them, which is a complete opposite of what he'd said previously. And people thought that that was quite a good, positive thing for him to say, but I suppose he's so erratic and unreliable that it's very difficult to say what he would say next week. So I'm not sure if with Trump as the broker, just as in with Palestine, we're going to get progress. I don't see how that works. So I suppose it puts pressure on Europe diplomatically and militarily to fill that void. And that is difficult, as you mentioned, because there's been incursions into Polish airspace, which is deeply problematic.
Thank you, Mike. Maureen, would you agree with Mike that Trump vacillates on a daily basis, but maybe more importantly, he's failed when it's come to the war in Ukraine?
Well, Mike's absolutely right that not only does he vacillate day by day, but he seems to vacillate according to the last person that he's spoken to. I mean, why he said at the United Nations that he thought Ukraine could get all the territory back, I don't know, and nobody seems to have followed him up on that. I mean, the situation is getting worse and worse with these drone strikes. huge number of drone strikes every night on Kyiv itself, but on other parts of Ukraine. And then we see these drones straying into other countries like Poland and Denmark, possibly. Putin isn't going to come to any table anytime soon, I don't think. And Trump is not serious, I don't think. He keeps saying that support from the US depends on countries stopping buying oil from Russia, and Europe ought to be taking the lead. Now, I don't think Europe's stepping up to the plate fast enough, or else it isn't telling us that it is. So I think Zelensky is in a very vulnerable position at the moment, and I think Europe taking the lead needs to be speaking to Trump again and seeing exactly where he thinks this is going, and what the solution is. It's been tried to get Putin to a ceasefire situation, and that's not happening. So I'm very despondent about Ukraine at the moment.
Thank you, Maureen. As Keir Starmer continues his attempts to out-Farage, on Friday Starmer proposed the idea of ID cards for UK citizens, thus making it easier to identify and discriminate against those who do not have the right identity. A sort of digital yellow star, as it were, Ausweis bitte, a reference to the stars, the yellow stars that Jewish people were forced to wear openly and during the Second World War. Labour quickly rolled back on the name Brit card as they realised that it might not go down so well with folks in Northern Ireland, Wales and here in Scotland. Maureen, I don't exist because I don't drive, so I don't have a driver's licence with photo ID, and I don't have a passport, a current passport. My most recent passport has expired. So I would like an ID card, some kind of ID, when I go to vote or whatever, to prove that I actually exist. I'm jealous of my friends in Europe because they've got ID cards and they can go, they don't need a passport, they can go anywhere they want within Europe just by showing their ID card. But what information do you think is going to be recorded by this government? I remember Gordon Brown floated the idea of an ID card, and I wanted an ID card back then, but I was against it because they were going to put everything they knew about me, and now with AI, they're going to be able to make links. Is this something is this a good thing or is this a bad thing?
Well, interestingly, apparently 53% of the British population in a poll said that they were in favour of ID cards. Now, we don't know the reasons behind that. Is it for ease, like you want, Brian, or is it because it's seen as being a way of stopping the boats? We don't know. And the idea that it's going to stop the boats is for the birds, because if the smugglers can get people on boats and fake IDs, then they're going to be able to fake these ID cards. And it is interesting that Stammer immediately rolled back on the idea of calling it a Brit card. I mean, did Morgan McSweeney, who's Scottish, not pick that up and say that would go down really badly, or has he completely lost the plot? You know, private companies like stores have lots of information on us. And I thought that during COVID, you know, where you had to have your national, not just your national insurance number, but your NHS number was often quoted on things. Having it all together doesn't seem that bad. And as you say, many countries in Europe have it, and you don't need a passport to get from one country to another in Europe. And apparently, although I haven't looked into it, Estonia has a really good system. So per se, I think people are less against it than they were previously. But the reason that Stammer is now introducing this or wanting to introduce this is completely the wrong way. To say that it's going to be another tool in the box to stop illegal immigration, I just think is not going to cut it at all.
Thank you, Maureen. Mike, do you agree with Maureen? Starmer's Labour government brought in proscription. We've seen elderly people and people with disabilities being arrested on the streets simply for holding up a piece of cardboard with some words on it. Is this another attempt at autocracy? Do you trust Starmer, or do you, or future Westminster governments when it comes to ID?
No, not at all. And I mean, I think the problem is that there are examples of places where there are ID cards and they have been successful, but they land in a political context of trust of politicians or trust of the state. And as you say, we're at one of the most authoritarian phases of the British state ever. So the landscape that these kind of things lands in is very important. And I noticed that yesterday, the petition against this has reached over 2 million signatures in a day. And I think what he's done is really unite nationalists in Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, where being told you're going to carry a mandatory Brit card is gone down badly, but also libertarians who just think this is an authoritarian step. And I saw too that the Liberals immediately rejected it. It was interesting, the response, because we saw Chris Musson, the deputy editor of The Sun in Scotland, immediately pounce on this because they were saying that John Swinney had invented that it was called a Brit card as a sort of nationalist ruse, until it was pointed out that actually that is what it was called. That's what they launched it as, and that's what it is. Saw also the involvement of Lewis Goodall from the Newsagents podcast came out and said, oh, well, this is really good for people in poverty. Didn't really explain how that worked. And then it was pointed out that his wife, Tone Langdon, works for the Tony Blair Institute, which is one of the main drivers of this project. So I think he was really compromised, and the very legitimate issue that was raised by John Swinney and others about this kind of being a mandatory British nationality hasn't really been thought through. And I'm not quite sure whether they rode back because they launched it and then thought, oh, this is going down terribly, or whether they did it deliberately as a kind of provocation and then realised this has gone badly. I'm not sure, but it does seem a very botched issue. And I think Maureen's right. Does Morgan McSweeney did nobody really consult Labour politicians or anybody in Northern Ireland, Wales and Scotland? And I think the answer to that is no. So I don't trust it. I think it's dangerous taking us into the surveillance state. And I think we've got perfectly adequate ways of establishing your identity if we need to at the moment.
Thank you, Mike. I'm actually a bit of a fan of Lewis Goodall, who's one of the three in the Newsagents podcast, just in case anybody at home was wondering. He usually seems to be on the button, but so that's good to know. Maureen, where do you think the ID card and Starmer and people seeing it as another attempt at his autocracy, where's that going to leave Anas Sarwar? Is he in favour of it? I haven't heard anything.
Well, I did hear Anas Sarwar being interviewed this morning, but I don't think he was asked that question. I mean, my question would be, is this going to, if it does come to a bill and is going through the House of Commons and the Lords, is this going to pass? Because I think it might be something, another kind of two-child benefit cap issue for Labour backbenchers. And I doubt, with the Tories against it, Labour against it, the Liberal Democrats against it, and SNP against it, and apparently Reform, although they've only got 4 or 5 MPs, whether this is going to get through the House of Commons. So I think it might just be another idea of Keir Starmer's that he's flying, but will come to grief. I don't know what you think, Mike.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think Kimmy Badenoch said she wasn't sure about it. She didn't come out very clearly, although people like David Davis had been against it before. But on that issue of Anna Sarwar, the Sunday Times put a piece out today saying that Anna Sarwar will have to sever ties with Keir Starmer or suffer electorally, something that every dog on the street has known for a long time. But it was really interesting, the Sunday Times coming out and saying that. And it does add to this perception of Starmer being beleaguered, and the possible rise of Andy Burnham as an alternative leader has been floated and has been denied very unconvincingly by Andy Burnham. So there's definitely people on manoeuvres trying to think about how they can replace Starmer, and with him, perhaps that ID card system would go too.
Thank you, Mike. I wasn't planning to move on to Sarwar and his position until the next item, which is going to be the Labour Party conference. But Maureen, what do you think? Where is Sarwar now? I remember many times on this programme we've said that his every time he says that he's going to be the next First Minister, it's going to depend on how well Starmer does. And you have both implied that Starmer's not going to do very well on ID cards. So to use what Mike said, is Anna Sarwar going to have to sever ties if he wants to survive?
Well, even now, whether he severs ties or not, he's not in a good place electorally, according to the polls in the run-up to the Scottish Parliament elections next year. I can't see Sarwar severing ties with Keir Starmer. I think he's pretty close to him. But I'm sure he will have very strong words with Starmer about ID cards and lots of other issues. I mean, it is astonishing that Starmer is in the position that he's in just a year after coming to power. And I think it's quite unprecedented at the moment. And, this ID card issue doesn't endear him to the electorate, I don't think, either. As I say, it is to me symptomatic of how the Labour government is thrashing about to find issues to counter Farage, where it would seem that the Labour Party is hemorrhaging support not just to Farage and Reform, but also to the Greens and the Lib Dems. So, I mean, I think this is a whole other issue for discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Maureen. Well, we're about to move on to Mike, forgive me, I'll get into trouble every time I mention the voice in my ear, but did you hear the voice in my ear talking about, I know the audience didn't, but my question is to Mike, what do you think about ethnicity in terms of the ID card?
Yeah, well, I think there is this this issue. It's sometimes called the boomerang effect, where the imperialist effects that we have on countries that we've colonized end up coming back to us. And there is two elements to the identity card. One is, as Maureen says, to fend off the resurgent reform threat. And that's why religious and ethnic identity is to be placed on the card. It's to throw red meat to the reform base. I don't think, nobody really thinks that's going to work. If you're motivated by the kind of issues of reform, why would you take kind of reform light in the form of Labour? I don't think that's going to work. What they need to be doing is having a counter narrative on immigration to the far right. And I think Anas Sarwar is completely compromised here. I don't know if you remember, he said that we would be at the beating heart of the UK government. Yeah, he was obviously not consulted about the ID card being the Brit card. And he at one point had this line where he was going to be standing up for Scotland against Starmer, which was a bizarre line to take, but he was going to stand up against his own party leader. So, yeah, I think it's problematic because you have the Brit card as this thing that's going to stop immigration or control immigration somehow. But that ends up with an authoritarian consequences for all of us. And I think that's going to be deeply unpopular, as the petition shows.
Thank you, Mick. Maureen, we're officially out of time on this one, but I haven't heard, is Farage going to be in favour of the ID card? And if he is in favour of the ID card, this thing about ethnicity, should we be nervous?
I mean, I cannot possibly understand why you need ethnicity and religion on an ID card. It's for people who have the right to work here, I understand. So why on earth would you want that on it? And who's going to see it and use it? I mean, that is just an absolute nonsense. And really we need to, well, as Mike said, there's 2 million people signed a petition already. But these are the kind of questions that need to be raised as a bill goes through Parliament. And as I say, I certainly do think it will become unstuck. I mean, even if you got all our information together, apart from the census, who on earth, as I say, needs to know your religion or your ethnicity? And this is just, to me, stoking up problems and division in the country rather than trying to settle anything. And it shows how wrong-headed Starmer is on moving on to Farage's platform.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. And before we move on, I suppose, here in the UK, apparently we've only ever had mandatory ID cards, a mandatory ID in times of war, which begs the question, are we at war? And if we are at war, then who are we at war with? But we have to move on. As the Labour conference begins in Liverpool, Starmer says that Labour are facing the fight of their lives. But what kind of victory would it be if Labour were to beat Farage by adopting the policies of reform and the far right, with increasing calls within Labour to reform the ECHR, that's the European Court of Human Rights, and clamp down on migration? What did Douglas Alexander, who is now the Scottish Secretary, and Anas Sarwar have to say? What will they have to say in their speeches this afternoon? Maureen, I think it's your turn to answer first this time. We touched on it previously on where is Sarwar without Starmer, and we've got the conferences starting today. What's your thoughts on Labour?
Well, I think they have a big job to do in trying to regain the trust of the British electorate. I thought Starmer made a fairly good attempt this morning on Laura Kuenssberg to defend his position and say to get the debate back on the economy, and people need to feel better about themselves, feel that they're not just going from day to day or food bank to food bank, and that they actually do see an improvement in their lives. But I think he's got a very hard job because, of course, the media will focus on Starmer's unpopularity in the country and within some sections of the Labour Party. As far as Anas Sarwar's and Douglas Alexander's speeches this afternoon, I doubt that anybody would disagree with me when it'll be all about SNP bad. They've already got their slogan. What is it? SNP knackered something and something. I can't remember, but yeah, we'll get those printed out several times during both their speeches. And I can guarantee that Douglas Alexander's will be nastier than Anna Sarwar's.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. Yeah, SNP bad, and yet people keep on voting for them. Mike, kind of hinted at in the intro, is Starmer the warm-up act for Farage? And if he is, where will that leave Sarwar and his desire to become First Minister?
I don't think Sarwar's becoming First Minister anytime at all. And I think Maureen's right that Douglas Alexander is kind of brought in as a bit more of an attack dog. Poor Ian Murray was axed and then quickly reinstated in a sort of shambles. But the idea that Douglas Alexander would be brought in to freshen things up, there's nothing like a face from the past. It kind of shows the redundancy of the new Labour input, that they had to fall back on somebody from that era. I think Maureen is also right that Douglas Alexander will be extremely aggressive, and I suspect that he will reiterate the line that Keir Starmer put out this week, that there will be no referendum. It doesn't matter what we vote for. It doesn't matter if there's a pro-independence majority at Holyrood. There will be no referendum. So their answer to the question, is this a voluntary union, is no. And it's very dangerous ground for them to say it doesn't matter how you vote. It's all the polls show them going down very badly next year at Holyrood, and they're in deep trouble. They're having to defend the inheritance of Peter Mandelson, whose plan we saw play out at the banquet with Trump. That was the plan from Mandelson, and they're having to defend Morgan McSweeney's plan and agenda. And it came out this week that Morgan McSweeney has much closer ties to Israel than was understood. It also came out further revelations from the Epstein files about Musk and Prince Andrew's involvement. And so all of this is not going away. There's a kind of constant ebb and flow of information coming out about the Israeli project, which Labour are still deeply committed to. And I don't really see how Anna Sarwar can cut himself adrift from this. And I think he will go down with the ship that is Keir Starmer's Labour project.
Thank you, Meg. Maureen, we can't say very much about it because it's one of these things that's going to be investigated. But Scottish Labour, along with UK Labour, Westminster Labour, they've been losing a lot of MPs, MSPs, councillors of late. Is that indicative of the state of Labour?
I just find this really difficult to deal with, that people in public office think that anything dodgy or illegal, that they can get away with it, is just absolutely awful. We don't know what is behind the latest case of an MSP being suspended from the Labour Party. But as you said, there have been a number of councillors, Labour councillors recently, who have been, dealt with in the courts even. So all of this, and you always touch wood that, your own party's assessment is as rigorous as it can be, and that these kind of things are weeded out at that stage in your own party. But, nothing's 100%. But I think in terms of Labour, it just shows that they're the same old, and that Sarwar, I think, is in a really difficult position. The idea that he still holds or still articulates that he's going to unseat John Swinney is really, as Mike says, pretty much for the birds, according to the polls. But we always have to remember that, and especially as a politician who has served, that a week is a long time in politics, and you never know what's around the corner. So I think Labour have got a hell of a lot to do this week, and it'll be interesting to see what commentators on next week's full breakfast after the Labour conference have to say about how they have managed this week.
Okay, thank you, Maureen. Mike, we're out of time on this one, but the SNP aren't immune. They just lost Jamie Hepburn recently after an altercation with Douglas Ross. But where do you think the two parties are in terms of losses?
Yeah, perhaps not Holyrood's finest moment, the Seagull scandal. Sorry, the question was about where SNP are.
No, we're on Labour, really. It was just to show that the SNP have also had have lost people through mishaps, should we call them?
Bad conduct in this situation.
Yeah, that's better put. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've all. It's very tempting to put a hand on Douglas Ross, but you can't really do that if you're a elected politician, and obviously Jamie Hepburn had to go. Yeah, not a good place at all.
Yeah. Okay. So as I say, we're out of time. So on Thursday, out of time on that item. We're not out of time yet, folks, for the whole show. On Thursday, STV announced that it would be implementing cost cuts by ending local news broadcasts in the North East and they're going to pay off 60 staff to save £2.5 million. This is bad news for media plurality in Scotland and reduces the opportunities for jobs for young people in television in Scotland. Mike, I think I probably should have come to you on the last question, but this isn't just a bad news for people that are looking for jobs. This is going to end up, apparently there was 60 jobs are going to go. That's 10% of their workforce. Regional news programming across Scotland is going to be cut as a result, but regional news is vital. People rely on regional news to decide how they're going to vote in the council elections, in the Holyrood elections, in Westminster elections, and people rely on regional news to find out how well their councillor's doing or their MSP is doing. I mean, this is just bad all around, isn't it?
It is bad, and 60 staff is a big hit, and I think you're absolutely right that in Scotland we are too centralised in our news. Regional and local news is absolutely vital. But I do think there's a broader question here of whose media isn't devolved, media and broadcasting isn't devolved. And there comes up again and again. There was the issue of the traitors having virtually no Scottish staff on it. Then it came up about Spider-Man, the movie, being filmed in Glasgow, but with virtually no local team on it. Then it came up about the Edinburgh Film Festival that Siobhan Sinnott raised about the fact that virtually nobody working here was employed in it, yet it was hugely subsidised by the Scottish Government. And I think Angus Robertson has some questions to ask about this, because each time these issues come up again and again and again, he comes out and says he's very concerned about it. But I don't see any concerted effort. I don't see any strategy to combat this. There seems to be no Scottish Government strategy around the media or broadcasting or press to make it more plural and to demand that if Scottish Government and public funding is put into an entity, that we demand that there's some people who work here that are employed in it. That should be just a low bar, a bottom line. So I think that this is a travesty for STV and for the North East, but I do think that there's bigger questions about what the Scottish Government's role in media is.
Thank you, Mike. Maureen, Mike raises serious issues there when he talks about traitors and Spider-Man and stuff, but he also mentioned Angus Robertson and the fact that media is reserved to Westminster. Is there anything that Angus Robertson can do to reverse that and to get media transferred to the power of Hollywood?
Well, before I come to that, can I say that, this has been a trend over decades. I'm old enough to remember the heyday of Grampian television, long before it became STV, which was a very vibrant and active part of our community. I mean, I remember when my father was an MP, picking up my mother and father, or driving them, should I say, when they were at Grampian television receptions. It really was a focus of life in the Northeast, and was very good at covering news items from the Northeast and the Highlands. And, to see the Grampian presence in Aberdeen possibly shutting is just, to me, inconceivable. And as Mike says, it's again a centralisation of news. And if you don't have reporters on the ground locally, then you're not going to get news from all the Erts and Perts of Scotland. That's just a fact. You mentioned Angus Robertson and what Angus Robertson can do, although you do also said that media is reserved. But listen, this is a very delicate area if a government is seen to be interfering in the press and the media. And this is a private company, and profits, like any other company, is the bottom line. So, until we have independence, and as a nation set out what we want from our press and from our print and broadcasting media, I'm not sure that there's anything they can do. I take the point about if there's government money going into media projects, that absolutely there should be clauses which say that you need to take on apprentices, which we expect of any company getting public money and, using local companies for their produce and everything else. But apart from that, I'm not au fait enough with this to know exactly what governments can do. And as I say, if governments are seen to be interfering in the press and the media, it's very difficult.
Thank you, Maureen. Mike, I don't know if you want to respond to that. Would an SNP government be on thin ice if it was to get involved in...
So I think there's a difference. Maureen's right that saying, interfering in press or media would be not on at all. But what we're talking about here is if the Scottish Government has funded, for example, the Edinburgh Film Festival to millions of pounds and actually saved it and resurrected it and funded it, and then that project goes ahead but doesn't employ anybody who's from here, or virtually nobody who's from here, that's not okay. So that's just about putting stipulation in your funding. That's not about interfering with media. And I think the same goes with BBC Scotland. That they should be enforcing the Ofcom regulations, which say that if you have a project that's based in Scotland or in other parts of the UK, there should be a percentage of people from there that are employed. And that's not happening at all. And it feels like there's nobody really who is batting for the industry. And what we could have is what we have in Ireland, where you have an ecosystem of writers, producers, technicians, editors, and that go from the written word to theatre to TV to film. And that's what you want to develop. And that we seem to be unable to develop that here. Instead, what happens is a film will come into town and be shot here and celebrated. Oh, great, we've got a film industry. Well, we don't. And we don't because nobody is cultivating it.
Thanks, Mike. Maureen, we're pretty much out of time, but do you want to respond to that? The fact that it's not about government interference, but it's about people want to come to Scotland to film here, but we don't seem to be dealing with it properly.
Yeah, I absolutely take that point. And, I suppose the counterpoint to that is that, we have film studios now that are very active, and it is good for the local economy that all these people are coming to film in Scotland. But whether we're making the most of it, obviously, as Mike says, is very much in question, and how a government develops a strategy to make sure that happens is a valid question, and perhaps going into an election, it's something that political parties should be thinking about.
So it's another reason for an independent Scotland being able to do what it wants.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you. A new poll shows that 53% of Scottish voters do support Scottish independence. The same poll also shows that the SNP are on course to win the Holyrood election next year, ahead of the Labour Party, who are in third place behind Reform UK. Maureen, we just touched on Scottish independence there helping the film industry. What do you think about there's been more than one poll recently, hasn't there, that says that independence is in the lead?
Yes, I think it's been pretty consistent, over 50% for a while now. I think that it definitely needs to be nearer 60 or over 60. The higher the better, obviously, for Scottish independence. But I think it needs to be higher. I am getting more increasingly suspicious and skeptical about polls, because we've seen in the how wrong things were in the last general election, and also in the Hamilton by-election. So I much prefer to see what the feeling is on the ground when I'm out canvassing. Clearly John Swinney's doing a hell of a job to rehabilitate, if you like, the SNP after really hard times that we've gone through. He's doing an absolutely sterling job, and I think the party itself is having more confidence in itself too. But I would say there's still a long way to go, and a lot of hard work to be done in the next few months to get the support for the SNP up to match that of Scottish independence, and for people to see that we wouldn't even be talking about independence if there wasn't a very, very strong Scottish National Party and a Scottish National Party government.
Thank you, Maureen. Mike, Maureen just said, it's been consistently at 50. Polls have been consistently over 50% recent for a good while now. But how do we get to 60% and higher? Surely we can't just rely on Labour or any Westminster government doing badly. Maureen, earlier on you said it'll be interesting to find out next week on Full Scottish what people think about the Labour conference. I'm wondering, will they lift the two child cap, and how's that going to that's going to free up money for the SNP government? But the question in hand is Scottish independence and the polls. Mike, I'm sorry for such a garbled question, but how do we get it to 60% and higher?
I think we need to reconstruct and remake the case for independence at a much more fundamental level than just reiterating what was said in 2014 over and over. And I think we need to create a credible strategy for gaining independence, rather than just, if we get it to 60%, it will magically happen. The polls this week showed, in terms of seat representation, that the SNP would win 63 seats in Holyrood and the Greens 6, giving 69, and the other four parties having 60. So it would give a pro-independence majority. But we need to have leaders that would articulate what they would do with that and why that would be a good thing, rather than just say, well, we need to get to 60%, or we've got a pro-independent majority, so that will magically release change. It clearly won't. What is also interesting, so that would be disastrous for Labour, but it would also be disastrous for Alba. And the idea that these very, very small parties that are on half or 1% or at tops 2%, need to be supported in order to get a supermajority is also just like an incredible thought. It doesn't make it's just not rational thinking. So I think whilst there is some good news about polling for independence and for independent supporting parties at Holyrood, we need to go a long way further to hear what that strategy is, because a lot of people are just hearing, I don't hear any strategy for how you're going to enforce some change through that mandate.
Thank you, Mike. Maureen, at the start of the show, I know you said you're here on speaking for yourself, not speaking for the as SNP president, but in response to what Mike was saying, is John Swinney and his strategy vote SNP 1 and 2, an SNP majority of MSPs is going to give a mandate? Is what Swinney is doing going to make people... I was also that thing about new voters, so many young people that didn't get a chance to vote in 2014, but is John Swinney doing the right thing?
In my view, yes, and of course it'll be debated at conference. But I think, SNP 1 and 2 is absolutely, or both votes SNP, absolutely necessary. We've seen that we can't really rely on the Greens or any other pro-independence party, and it's got to be, polls are saying we've get 63 now. It needs to be 65 or over, and a situation like we were in 2011, because that's the only numbers that a Westminster government who believes in first past the post only is going to believe in. But I think in terms of getting the pro-independence majority up to 60 is more likely to come not from process and saying what exactly the process will be, but saying why independence is absolutely necessary in order to improve people's lives now. And, there are people who say, yes, I believe in independence, but not now. But if not now, when? I think it's more vital than ever that we move to independence quickly and use the resources of Scotland to better the lives of folk. And I can't see any other way. So that's the kind of message that we need to get across to the voters in Scotland between now and May.
Thank you, Maureen. Mike, we're almost out of time, but that thing about young voters, they are the big unknown. They were too young to vote in 2014. I'm not sure that they're always included in new polls with waiting and the like. Will the next election, as Maureen just mentioned, in May in Holyrood 2026, is that going to be a big indicator as to how young voters are going to vote when it comes to the big independence referendum?
I mean, we do know from data that the people under 35 are massively in favour of Scottish independence, and in terms of identity, see themselves as Scottish, not British. And that is almost reversed when you go to older people, 65 plus. So there is a huge demographic shift coming down the line that would be very pro-independence. But I think you have to give people something to vote for. You have to be future-oriented. You need to think of what are the challenges for young people about climate change, about jobs, about our housing crisis, which are big issues that affect people who are of a younger generation. And I think the politicians need to really speak to those issues.
Thank you, Mike. Maureen, we are out of time, and I really want to let both of you get back to what's left of the weekend, but it only seems right to give you the last word. Is there anything that you'd like to say in response to what Mike just said?
I think Mike's right about young people, and I think the fact that the SNP is focusing on the digital strategy, and it's obviously paying off with huge numbers of views of our social media is really important, but that needs to be ramped up hugely, as I say, between now and May. But the offer, as Mike says, has got to be really strong as well. And I think it's an opportunity for us to be much more bold and radical about our policies rather than canny. And I think, John is the ultimate in canny, but I think our conference will show that, I think we do need to be thinking outside the box in terms of what an independence offer would look like.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you, Mike. But that's it for this week's Full Scottish. Before we go, can I please just remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland we depend on your generosity. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, we thank you very much. We can only exist with your support. You know that our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford just £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or please simply donate whatever you can afford. So thank you again to our guests, to Mike Small and to Maureen Watt. Really appreciate your input this weekend, and thank you to you at home for watching. Goodbye.